Hello, everyone. Good to be back with you. I'm sorry last week fell apart, but you wouldn't know that, of course. I'm at the age where every morning you wake up, you wonder what doesn't work so well. And about 10 days ago, I got up and took a bite into a fresh apple and left a front tooth in it. So I'm about to top up my dentist's bank account. Sometime this week, they'll get started on it. That sort of discombobulated me because it means my diction is not as clear as I would like it, but Craig says you can still hear, so that's all right for the moment. But feedback would be welcome, and including, well, you've done well, it's time to retire. That's okay as well. It looks as though things are going on. I mean, I'm just organizing at the moment for this year's trip to Jamaica to give a lecture to the first-year medical students and preach and usually go on the radio and talk to 2 or 3 other groups. So we'll be there for 10 days probably. It's very enjoyable in October, end of October. Last few weeks of October will be when we go. And I really enjoy doing that sort of thing. There are a few things more satisfying than realizing when you're talking to young people that they're actually enjoying what you've got to say. And it's helpful to them. I saw a lovely video this week of John Lennox doing a masterclass on how to do this sort of thing in the University of Chicago. And he frequently defaults to C.S. Lewis, and why wouldn't any serious Christian? So he was doing the usual thing of you can't have Christ for what you want. You can't have him just as a great teacher. You can't have him as a madman. You're forced to say the only thing you can honestly do is try and take him seriously. And he does that process with these students in the University of Chicago. And he said, but many of you are going to say, you can't prove any of this stuff of yours. And he says, oh, but I can. I can. The problem is you have been led into a truncated understanding of what proof looks like. And then he says, let me just tell you a story to finish. A true one. He said, in this lecture in Chicago, it finished in a very unusual way because as he came to the end and he was talking about the reality of committing yourself to Christ and how it works, suddenly from the balcony, a young man stood up and shouted, look at me, look at me. And everybody looked, of course. And when he got everybody's attention, he said to John Lennox, a few weeks ago, I heard you speak in Penn State. My life was a total mess. I was falling apart. Everything was going wrong. And something you said hit my mind in some way, and I started reading the Bible and thinking and doing what you said, being honest with Christ. He said, my life has totally changed. Just look at me. You can see it. And that, of course, is what the early church did. That's why it spread. They looked, they saw, and they said, it's amazing. These people love one another. I mean, that's it. That's the gospel in a nutshell. It's an undeniable reality when it happens. It's subjective, yes, but it's not entirely subjective. It's a subject, you or me, coming into contact with something which is ultimately objective. Reality, meaning, purpose, it transforms lives. It always has. And you even see now, several times, it's happening a lot in Britain at the moment as the pushback at last comes against stupid secularism. And people are saying very simple things like, I want my country back. And the more thoughtful ones saying, we are a Judeo-Christian and primarily Christian country. Immigrants coming must accept that. They cannot attack it. If they attack it, we should send them back. They wouldn't tolerate for a moment in their own culture that they come from And again, this week happened to be the date on which 870 plus Christians were slaughtered by Muslims in Italy when they first entered Italy because they wouldn't convert. They just beheaded the men and enslaved the women and children. This is the religion of peace? No. Only peace on their terms, not peace as an objective reality on its own. The world is changing at the moment, so we're in a time of great flux. But the objective reality of Christ coming into subjects like you and me is still happening, and happening more, not less, and happening to groups that in the past you wouldn't have seen. Interestingly, young men are more attracted to the church than young women at the moment. It used to be the other way around. But the women have got sucked into sort of angry social justice and the like, and woke nonsense. Hopefully they'll get over it soon, because they do look for decent men who might make half-decent husbands and half-decent fathers, and they're more likely to find those in young men who are seeking meaning than those who are having fun. That video was fun to watch, and you can find it on YouTube. And John Lennox is a master at apologetics in such a lovely way. I mean, I look upon him as everybody's favourite grandfather, you know. He's not fashion conscious like Jordan Peterson. He's comfortable, and he makes you feel comfortable, and then you have this mind like a razor blade popping up and chopping down the rubbish with no trouble at all. So if you don't know him, you have a great thing coming for you just in starting to get to know him by listening to him. Listening is not enough, but fortunately he's written a lot of little books which are very nicely done, very dense, but accessible. And I was talking about literacy a week or two back, and it is not enough to go to audiobooks. I mean, there are educators, so-called academics, say, well, the kids don't need to learn to read. They can listen, and they can speak, and it can be turned into print, which is stupidity of a very high order. I hope all of you who are listening to this have had the experience of reading something and being shocked by it in the sense that it sticks in your mind and you can't get rid of it for a while. That's wonderful. That's what the first 7 years of a child's life should be about, being presented with all the stuff that actually has survived the test of time. The fairy tales are moral discussions. All sorts of things are going on there. Read Tolkien's wonderful essay on fairy tales, arguing that they're truer than reportage, which certainly today they are, where so many reporters come to their task with such a commitment to a narrative that they won't even report truth if it doesn't fit what they want it to be. That's disastrous. I mean, Britain at the moment, it's so sad to watch. 700 farmers and farming people have been arrested for protesting against the government's plan to tax farms so that they can no longer be passed from one generation to the next. That will destroy rural Britain. Absolutely destroy it. And so what the government is behaving in Orwellian fashion. People are being arrested because they are protesting. It's a free country. We're allowed to protest, but not now, apparently. But the pushback is real. The fuss over the woman who was so angry when that young refugee, who I hope was mad, I don't know, killed several little girls at a dance class. And she wrote an angry tweet saying she wishes they were all dead and they should all be sent back. And she was arrested for hate speech. Now, she's not a hateful person. She wasn't being hateful. She was just angry at that point. But the judges said that she needed to go to prison for 30 plus months. Where are those judges living? In Cloud Cuckoo Land or somewhere? I don't know. There's been a lot of fuss, and she should be out this week, but she's still been separated from her children for several months. This is disgraceful. And people are reacting to it, arresting farming people for saying, you can't destroy our way of life so that you have more taxes coming in. I don't know how to even begin to talk to people who can think like that. I don't know whether you do. And they're our rulers. They were elected. And they've lost their way. Let me read to you. It's been a good week because this month's first things arrived. And that's always a nice moment for me as I thumb through and have a quick look to see what I'm going to be reading in the next little while. Just the few days it supports my habit. I just want to read a short passage to you, and then we can talk about it a little bit. In this passage, it's in a paper that really discusses an intellectual quarrel that went off a few years ago between Hugh Trevor Roper, who's a historian, and Evelyn Waugh, one of the most famous novelists of the last 100 years. But Waugh understood that history mattered. Although Roper was a historian, he was also a reductionist and had a left-wing view of the world. But here's what Waugh wrote in the middle of a conflict that occurred in print. Waugh wrote this: during the war and throughout the 1950s, a group of very articulate, socially reactionary Roman Catholics, all or nearly all converts, pushed themselves forward and evidently thought that they could be the ideologues of the post-war generation. They established themselves by patronage and infiltration in certain institutions, the British Council, the Foreign Office, etc., and they wanted to establish themselves in the universities. They didn't, of course, but he goes on a little later to quote again the author of this article, and he says, the loss of faith in Christianity and the consequent lack of confidence in moral and social standards have become embodied in the ideal of a materialistic mechanized state already existent in Russia and rapidly spreading south and west. He's writing in the 1950s. It is no longer possible, as it was in the time of Gibbon, to accept the benefits of civilization and at the same time to deny the supernatural basis on which it rests. As the issues become clearer, the polite skeptic, and with him that purely fictitious figure, the happy hedonist, will disappear. I think he was a prophet because I think it's happening. The polite skeptic, it disappeared quite quickly. The angry skeptic took his place. But as you see with the whole range of people that are in the academic world who are revolting against the reductionistic way of understanding that comes from a purely scientific understanding of the world, they're realizing that to be skeptical to the point of denying that there might be metaphysical truth is stupid beyond words. The places where no thoughtful person will say anything of that sort is, of course, in the hard sciences, particularly cosmology, quantum physics, and molecular biology. And the reason is very clear. And the world has changed, but it's not going to change in high school for another 20 years because it takes a long while for these things to percolate through. But in 1952-53, when DNA was isolated, the world changed. But people didn't realize because it was going to take some time. But nobody doing molecular biology these days, if they stop and think for a moment or two about what they're doing, they will be awestruck. John Lennox likes to refer to DNA as the longest sentence ever written. And in a sense, that's true. But I prefer to call a coded message or messages because that's the way we look at it. I mean, we don't read DNA as a whole like you would read a book. That's not what you do. What you do is you take little bits of it, and with our biochemical scissors, we cut out what looks to us like a gene or an interesting bit, and we look at it by putting it into microbes and making them express, it's a term we use, but make the protein or whatever it is that that bit of DNA is supposed to do. And we can work away at it. And what it does, of course, is make us really stop and think. If you've got any capacity to be awestruck, this ought to do it. 3.5 billion left. It depends how you count it, because it's a double strand, because of its very sophisticated way of copying itself. But the basics information contained in DNA doesn't do anything. It's a library, or more precisely, a set of blueprints, perhaps. There are means whereby a message can be sent. We need such and such a blueprint, and it's dispatched to the point where it's needed. And when it gets there, it's used to make the protein that they need. This is an astonishing phenomenon. Everybody should be capable of understanding enough of it to be awestruck. In every cell in your body, there are approximately 2 meters of DNA sequences, as I said, in double strand. That's an astonishing length. And God is so good at origami, he can fold it up and put it inside a cell a few microns across. And it folds beautifully. And even the folding is not random. It has functional importance. When I first came to Canada in 1980, people were still having very naive and rather arrogant views of what was going on. And they'd got to the point where step 1 was well underway, but there seemed to be an awful lot of DNA that didn't make genes, and they called it junk DNA. The arrogance, even if it was only the packing needed to make the origami possible, it wouldn't be junk. And of course, by this stage, 45 years later, nobody talks about junk DNA unless they're wishing to be particularly obnoxious over the issue of what we're dealing with. It's all turning out to have function. And what would you expect if you're a Christian and you believe the greatest designer of all time made it? You're going to expect to be surprised. We can't imagine taking a page like this, say, and an ordinary magazine, 2 columns a page, a few thousand words, a repair of pages. Now, DNA has information like that, but DNA can be overridden. There can be 2 messages out by 1 digit, so to speak, 1 letter, written in the same sequence, producing 2 totally different things. We haven't a clue how that's done. The guy who understood it first was a Christian, and he was totally awestruck when he realized what was going on. And he was also totally convinced that he didn't sort it out. It was a gift. And he belongs in a long tradition within the Western world science. Kepler probably being the most famous version, who when he finally, after 5 or 6 years, recalculating the work of Tycho Brahe, realized that we didn't live on a perfect sphere and God didn't work with perfect circles as Aristotle expected him to. So the idea that the orbit of the Earth round the Sun was elliptical would have been unacceptable to Aristotle. It was unacceptable to Aristotelians, who were rigidly devoted to their master, but their master was wrong. He wasn't an experimentalist at all, so he was a great observer of nature. His physics, he should have gone to the nearest cliff and he would have made a lot more progress for us, because he wasn't one of the most intelligent men who ever lived. And the problem with being highly intelligent is you think you know everything quite frequently. It's a step towards pride, which has at some stage to be humbled. So Kepler, when he discovered that the orbit was elliptical, he wrote a prayer in his lab book giving thanks to God for showing him that fact. And the guy I was talking about earlier, who recognized that DNA was overwritten, he sat in his lab for a couple of hours, realizing that only he and God understood what he had understood sometime after midnight in Seattle a few years back. We need, as intellectuals, as teachers, to take a lot more interest in history, and particularly the history of our own subjects, because then we begin to be able to answer some questions that at the moment we're refusing to engage with because we're frightened of being politically incorrect. But experimental science only happened in the Western world to any significant extent. One Muslim tried it, but it was not compatible with the culture, and he had to pretend to be mad to avoid being killed till the angry sheikh died, and then he could suddenly receive his sanity back. And he got very close to understanding vision. He certainly understood that something like a crossover pathway system. He understood that you see in your circular eyes this field and this field, with the inner half on one side and the outer half, inner and outer, in each side. So he realized that the pathways for that information in the brain had to cross at some point. And so he made incredible progress, but he wasn't honored amongst his own people. Al Haytham, I think, but I might be wrong about that. One of the problems of being my age is that names get connected in the wrong place every now and again. But it's always interesting when I'm traveling, if I sit next to a Muslim, we end up talking about science, and he's astonished that I used to be more astonished than he would be now that I actually knew the names of the most important Muslim scientists who were not scientists in the modern sense, and what they'd done. Muslims don't know anything about that history. And if they did, it would help. And the internet, of course, is changing that. The greatest missionary in the world as far as Christianity conquering Islam is concerned is the internet, not missionaries as such. Of course, the internet plus the Holy Spirit. But now, all over the world, people are exposed to what's happening in other parts of the world. And it's having bad effects, but it's also having good effects. And I hope I live long enough to see some of what I could think will be the real outcomes. I think that the radical end of Islam, with its very fundamentalist view of the Quran, is not sustainable. So how they adapt to that reality remains to be seen. But some of their major scholars have now said, we have a problem. Some of the imams, at least one I've seen lecturing, say, we're facing a tsunami of people leaving Islam because what we've been teaching them cannot be sustained. So we ought to have some sympathy, because in the 19th century, that's what German philosophers did to Christianity. But we came through that, and we met them on their own terms. And nowadays you have theologians who are perfectly happy to engage with any of these people who thought they were going to take Christianity apart. They don't win the debates anymore. Dawkins has given up, and people like N.T. Wright are perfectly capable of defending serious reading of the scriptures and are able to show you why. So people like John Lennox will debate anyone, anywhere. Even people who are not Christian, like Belinsky, is very much in favor of much more open discussion, saying, look, it's time you woke up. If you want a really delightful, because he writes with a pen dipped in a mixture of elegance and venom, and he wrote a paper many years ago called So You Think You're a Darwinian, and he gives 10 reasons why you can't be. And that caused such a ruckus on A.L. Daly, the Arts and Letters Daily. It went on for weeks, if not months. He's Jewish, he's secular, but he's not secular in the sense he knows there is a reality beyond the immediate reductive scientific one. And we need to think our way through that. We need to teach it to our children. And it's fun to do. And we can win this. You do get sidelined on the way, but so what? I remember many years ago, I don't know why this comes up, but I might as well. It's coming to my mind. I'll let it out. I showed the film, what's it called now? Bernard Nathanson's film, to the medical students, in which he made a film which was filmed inside the uterus, filming an abortion. You actually see the child in utero trying to avoid the curette, and of course failing. Now, of course, the lecture room was dark, but I could hear the tears. And I was reprimanded for showing that film to the medical students. We want to teach them to honour truth, and then you deny it. This is Orwellian. You've got to engage with reality. It's a sine qua non for intellectual activity. I was disinvited from having any further part in the ethics program in the University of Ottawa Medical School. But the dean, who was a good man, did persuade me to run a reading program for the students who never read any Dostoevsky or anything else. And that was fun to do, but again, my biases showed, as they should. Also ran an Agnostics Anonymous group, which was entirely voluntary, but I got up to 25% of the class. We should be, like Paul, doing all things possible that by any means some may come to believe. And the most important thing, especially for us to do as a duty, is to simply tell what the Lord has done. That's it. Now, if you don't have anything to tell, you need to say your prayers and tell the Lord, I do believe in you, but I don't have any way of talking about that. Will you help me? And of course he will. You might find you're in for more than you realize, because it's when you go through the water, so to speak, and you come out the other side, that you realize I was not alone. So that article in First Things is worth reading. But what he's saying, and I'll read it again, the loss of faith in Christianity and the consequent lack of confidence in moral and social standards have become embodied in the ideal of materialistic mechanized state already existent in Russia and the rapidly spreading South and West, it is no longer possible, as it was at the time of Gibbon, to accept the benefits of civilization and at the same time deny the supernatural basis on which it rests. As the issues become clearer, the polite skeptic, and with him that purely fictitious figure, the happy hedonist, will disappear. Happiness is not possible in a reductive world because the world is not explained. And so you can't deal with it. Chesterton understood this in that lovely line where he says, as he finally recognized that the story of Christ, the gospel, the church, was true. And he said, suddenly, I realized why I could feel homesick at home. He knew he was longing for something. He didn't know what it was. And then he did. He was given the vision of reality that led him to become one of the greatest apologists of the Christian faith of all time. But it was quite late on.